All right, hello and welcome everybody to KBO Chats Live. I'm Sam Pasco alongside Erik Halterman, and this is week 2 of us breaking down every game on the slate for this 2021 KBO season. As always, be sure to check out our Twitter and website as well, rotowire.com/free KBO for a subscription, and follow us on Twitter at rotowirekbo. We first begin with taking a look at the league standings. Erik, what stands out to you, first impressions right now, just about 8 or 9 games so far?
Yeah, I think the main thing is that it's incredibly tight. The entire league is separated by just 2 games. I mean, you could say it's not a surprise that we see the Twins and Dinos at the top, but they're just 2 games out of last place. So I think it's too early to take much from the records. I think this time last year, the Dinos had gotten off to a tear and already looked like the best team in the league. I don't think anybody's gotten off to that kind of a start yet, but I think it's too early to draw particularly strong conclusions there. I'm mostly viewing the teams as pretty close to what they were last year still.
For sure, definitely. In terms of scoring, the Dinos they resume to near the top, but the number 1 team actually is the Lotte Giants. Is that surprising at all when you hear Lotte as the highest scoring team in the league?
Yeah, I think they were bottom half, somewhere between like 6 and 8 in scoring last year. Didn't really add any pieces. A lot of their key contributors are pretty old. Daiho Lee's like in his late 30s, Jungwoo Jun, mid 30s. So not a lot of guys that you'd expect to be taking big steps forward this year. So I highly doubt they'll end the year as the top scoring team, but got a couple hot bats early.
And one team that's actually been cold on the other end of that spectrum has been the SSG Landers, the newest branded team, formerly the SK Wyverns, for those of you new to this season. We worried about them yet, Erik? Just 4-4? I know you picked them as maybe one of the best teams in terms of the off-season additions. Are we getting worried about them?
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen something from that lineup. They did add a couple key pieces. Shin-Soo Choo probably has the best, or I think easily has the best track record of anybody in the league. I mean, granted, he's 38 years old, but he was close to a league average hitter at the MLB level last season. Hasn't done anything through 8 games, but, just 8 games. I would expect them to be at least closer to the middle of the pack this year. I think they've got 5 or 6 hitters who I'd be very comfortable recommending for DFS purposes most nights. So I think it's a deeper lineup than it was last year for sure. Wouldn't read too much into 8 games, but I really thought we would have seen something by now.
Yeah, we'll have to see how they progress. Don't have an easy matchup this week, which we'll get into. But other notes here, home-road splits, kind of unusual for Kia and NC with actually better records on the road than actually at home. Kia doesn't have a victory at home, and the Dinos just have 1. So just something to take a look out there. But the last thing to mention is the streaks. We have the Samsung Lions on a 5-game winning streak. Dinos not that far behind at 4. And the worst team, of course, is the Kia Tigers. Not doing too well. We thinking these streaks are going to continue? What are we thinking?
I mean, nobody should be surprised to see the Dinos playing well. It was a bit weird to see them start, 1-3. So not a surprise at all to see them playing like they're supposed to. If they do wind up, going 9-1 over their next 10, that's certainly not unheard of. They could certainly pull away early because I don't think any other team did a ton to really close that gap. And they were pretty clearly the top team last year, if not by a huge margin. So if they keep this up, I wouldn't be too surprised. I do think they are still the best team in the league. But where with the Lions, I think it's not the kind of streak I expect to last too much longer. They were near the bottom last year, didn't really add meaningful pieces. So I think this is just a case of them getting hot for a couple games. If we check in next week and they're won 11 in a row, I'll say something different. But for now, I haven't really changed my opinion of them.
Sounds good. Let's move now into tonight's games. A full slate. Doesn't look like rain is on the radar, which is great. We first begin with the Lotte Kia matchup. First thing I saw here was 2 pitchers with some ugly ERAs, but actually 2 pitchers that have been decent. Aaron Brooks, don't have to say much about him. All-star level talent when he's not being roughed up by the NC Dinos. In terms of Sunghong Lee, he's not bad. An ERA under 4 in October last year. 23 strikeouts against 6 walks. Are these 2? This is a pretty good pitching matchup. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think there's definitely plenty there with Aaron Brooks, one of the best starters in the league last year. Top 3 among qualified starters in ERA, WHIP, strikeout rate, walk rate. The whole package should be a contender for the best pitcher in the league this year. We're so early that one bad outing against the Dinos, which, anybody can have a bad outing against the Dinos. That'll ruin his early ERA, but it's going to take more than one start to worry me too much. So he'd actually be one of the guys I'd recommend for daily fantasy this week, again, despite that poor ERA and the fact that he's facing technically the best lineup in the league, at least through early season numbers. But again, small samples on both sides there. I think I'd be very comfortable starting Brooks. And then for Lee, he's a young guy who should have some promise. I think he's just 22 years old. It was a 3rd overall pick a few years ago. Didn't have a particularly amazing ERA in just 8 starts last year. It was 4.66, but he struck out nearly 22% of opposing batters, which is 4.5 ticks above league average, and had a better than average walk rate too. So there's plenty of promise despite mediocre ERA and despite pretty poor outing for a season debut here. I don't think he's a scary pitcher yet by any means. I think I'd be perfectly happy using some Tigers hitters in DFS, but if you wanted to take a shot on a guy like Lee, I don't think that's a bad idea either.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that offense, Kia is averaging under 4 per game. Lotte, obviously, shockingly, is the best team in terms of runs per game. We're looking at maybe Asap Son again. He went 2 for 4 to extend his 7-game hit streak last night. Over on the Tigers side, maybe Sunbin Kim as a bounce back guy, 6 for 10 in that Dino series. That's worth something. What are we thinking lineup-wise with these guys?
Yeah, I'd be pretty scared to use any Giants against Brooks, especially because a lot of the best ones are right-handed. If you wanted to be a contrarian and play Son, he is an excellent contact hitter, but not really the matchup I'd be looking for him here. On the Tigers side, Preston Tucker has been off to a terrible start. I think we talked several times last year about how he really was quite streaky. Mm-hmm. But on the whole, he was excellent. One of the better hitters in the league, not quite an MVP, but right up there in the next tier. His OPS is just 392 this year. But what that's done in daily fantasy is it's really dropped his price. I think this is the cheapest you're going to get Tucker, unless he keeps struggling even longer. But I think with a matchup against the starter, I'd say is unproven in Lee, even though there's something there. Tucker will get the platoon advantage against him, and he's as cheap as you're going to get him. So he's a bounce back I'd be interested in on DraftKings tonight.
All right. And then let's take a look at the picks here for the Lotte-Kia matchup. Lotte-Kia matchup here. Over-under set at 9 with the Tigers as the favorites. Where are you going to go, Erik?
I'm going to go under. Aaron Brooks is, again, he's an elite pitcher in this league, even if his ERA doesn't tell you that yet. And Lee, I think, is decent enough to hold down a Tigers offense that's generally struggling. But Brooks is enough better than Lee that I'm going to go with the Tigers here. Even though, again, their offense has been struggling. The Giants have been great. Small samples. I'm happy to stick with Brooks.
Under 9.5 and going with Brooks on the Kia Tigers for tonight for this matchup. Moving along, we have now a KT Doosan matchup. Here we have Doosan nearly coming back in the 9th inning last night. They scored 3 runs in the 9th inning, but they did lose 8-7. 2 pitchers here with ugly ERAs. They're a little better than those might suggest. But what do you think, Erik?
Yeah, Bay is an interesting one. Jasong Bay on the Wiz side. He kept his ERA under 4 last year, just under 4, 3.95. But it's hard to see him doing that again unless he improves his peripherals. Struck out just 13.4% of opposing batters, walked 12.3%. So pretty terrible marks on both ends there. It's actually a second straight year with an ERA under 4, but he had better peripherals 2 years ago. But even then, he didn't look like an intimidating arm. So I actually would be perfectly happy stacking the Bears tonight, even though Bay has pretty decent ERA numbers recently. He's just not somebody who's at all intimidating. And then on the other side, Young-Ha Lee for the Bears is still young and has some good seasons on his resume, but he pitched his way out of a rotation role last season. Actually ended up pitching pretty well in the bullpen. He saved 6 games. but his return to the rotation was not great to start this year. And I wouldn't have a ton of confidence in him unless he shows that he's, established a new level, which again, he could, given that he's young, but he was not a reliable arm at all last season.
Yeah, one interesting note with both these pitchers, they did go 5 or more innings in their first outing. So for what that's worth, even though they might be young. So offensively, though, we know Dusan is elite in terms of power, at least from last year. KT did lose Mel Rojas Jr. Becco Gong making up for that, though, 6-game hit streak. What are we thinking offensively?
Yeah, Becco Gong is more than capable of leading an offense. He's one of the better hitters in the league. I think the Wiz are just fine. Obviously, it's a pretty massive blow to lose the MVP and near Triple Crown winner, Mel Rojas Jr., but nothing wrong with Gong at the top of the lineup. Somebody hitting 406 already. He's still quite young. He could certainly get even better this year. He's a guy I'd be very happy paying up for against an unintimidating starter like Lee in this one. I think Zoilo Almonte, who's their switch hitting outfielder that's replacing Mel Rojas Jr. He hasn't looked like Mel Rojas Jr. yet, but all of these new foreign bats are priced way too low on DraftKings because they seem to be only looking at KBO stats, and Almonte has, 8 KBO games or something. So he's a cheaper whiz batter that I'd be happy to look at too.
In terms of the Bears, Jose Fernandez, 2 for 4. He was an MVP candidate, maybe taking over that slot from Mel Rojas Jr. this year. Do we see that maybe playing out tonight against Bay?
Yeah, I certainly think Fernandez is as good a bet for a multi-hit game as pretty much anybody on any day with the platoon advantage here against somebody I'm not scared of. Be very happy to select him in this one. He hasn't been off to a great start. I think his OPS still begins with a 6, but the thing about Fernandez is even when he's cold, he still gets hits. He's hitting 290, even in what you might even call a slump. So I think I'd be perfectly happy to expect a decent day from him here.
All right, then let's go to the picks. We got KT against Dusan. Total here, 9.5. Where are we going?
Definitely over. Don't trust either pitcher here. I think we could see a good amount of runs, and it's pretty tight. Neither pitcher is trustworthy. Both lineups were good last year. I'm going to slightly lean the Bears. I think that firepower with Fernandez and Jaewon Kim. I think that's quite a good core. Both of them will get the platoon advantage here. So I'm going to slightly lean Bears, but I think that one's pretty close to a push.
All right, moving on. Now we have the Hanoi Eagles taking on the Samsung Lions. The Lions won last night by a score of 4-3. In terms of these pitchers, if I told you got one stat line, 6 innings, 1 hit, no runs, against 3 2/3 innings pitched, 5 hits, and 3 runs, you tell me which one Nick Kingham had. You might have said the six scoreless innings. No, he was roughed up in his last start. Sungmin Lee looked pretty good in his last start. Do we trust Lee to silence the Eagles' bat tonight?
I can't say I trust him, but I'm definitely at least intrigued. He's not necessarily one of those high potential guys, though he is young. He was a 4th-round pick, and I think most of the top KBO pitchers tend to be first-rounders even because the draft pool just isn't that large in a smaller country like South Korea. So he's not somebody who comes with a ton of pedigree. He had a 6.84 ERA in limited action last year, a whip over 2, more walks than strikeouts. So there was just nothing at all in his stat line last season. That tells you he's going to have a good year this year. So I'm not all that swayed by one start, though, again, it was quite a good start and against a good Bears team. So if he has a couple more, given his youth, I'll take notice. But I think one start isn't going to sway me too much.
All right, and then in terms of Nick Kingham, what are we thinking there? New to this KBO team of his, and he was roughed up against his former team. Not a great way to start his Eagles tenure.
Yeah, I think 2/3 of his KBO starts thus far have been really bad, but that's 2 out of 3. So not necessarily enough to change our opinion of him all that much. My general rule with any pretty new foreign player in the KBO is you got to assume they're they should be one of the better players on their team. You got to trust the team's foreign scouts and got to figure they're giving those foreign player slots to guys who should be pretty good. And I don't think 3 starts is enough to convince me that he isn't. Again, he was cut short after just 2 outings last year for the Wyverns, now the Landers, with elbow issues. They end up getting released. Going to have to see, a lot more than just 3 starts to have a strong opinion on him. I wouldn't treat him as one of the better foreign arms, but just because he has MLB experience, you got to figure he should be at least pretty good. Obviously, we know the Wyverns weren't great at picking foreign starters last year, given how Ricardo Pinto struggled, but I don't think 3 starts, even if they're bad, is enough to put me completely off of him here.
Yes, he definitely was unfortunately lumped in with that Ricardo Pinto experience. You don't have to remind me, Pinto was bad last year. But offensively here in this game, we're looking at Ja-Wook Koo went 0 for 2 last night, but he was 12 for 24 with 2 home runs in last week's series. Dong-Yeom Kim settling in maybe 3 games under his belt. Ryan Healy on the Eagles, 2 for 8 in his last 2 games. Strikeouts are an issue with him, though. Who are we liking for DFS in these lineups?
Yeah, it's 2 generally unheralded lineups, but this is a game taking place in the most hitter-friendly park in the league, Daegu Samsung Lions Park. Tells you exactly where it is and who plays there, my favorite park name in baseball. And so that, I think, makes not all of these hitters interesting, but all of them more interesting than normal, especially given that on the Lions side, we have a very young and unproven pitcher, and on the Eagles side, we have somebody who's never had any success at the KBO level. So I'd be happy with, I think, most of the top 6 on the Lions side. We'd probably look at Ja-Wook Koo and Heyman Park first because they get the platoon advantage. But Jose Perella, like I mentioned earlier, with all of these new foreign bats on DraftKings, they're not being priced correctly yet. So even though he's been, merely decent so far, you get a good value on him. You get a good value on Ryan Healy too on the other side. If there were enough Eagles that I felt at all comfortable with, I think I would have recommended an Eagles stack here, just because, facing a young pitcher with a career ERA north of 6 in the most hitter-friendly park in the league, there's not really a better time to stack hitters than that. It's just there's not a whole lot of Eagles I trust. So I'd stick with the guy with MLB experience here. Has been fine, generally unremarkable so far, but a very small sample. And again, he's very underpriced. So he'd be probably the guy I'd look at first on that side.
All right, moving into the pick for this game for the Eagles Lions. Over-under set at 10. Where are we leaning?
I'm going to go over. Park helps a lot there. Really don't have much reason to trust Sungmin Lee. Maybe trust Nick Kingham, but who really knows? And I'm actually going to pick the Eagles. It's not something I do very often, but that's mostly just a bet on the Eagles scouting department that they did find somebody in Nick Kingham, even though he hasn't shown anything yet. Sample size is too small for me to give up on him completely. And the Eagles lineup has actually been okay this year. I think they're maybe 5th in scoring, which is a surprise, but as long as they're at least alive, I think given that they're facing, again, a young unproven pitcher with a career ERA north of 6, and they've got a foreign starter on the mound, I think that's a good enough time to pick a team that we expect to not pick very often this season.
All right, moving on now to the NCSG game. This one could get ugly. The Dinos did win yesterday 4-2. We have a Wes Parsons debut. Talking about those foreign pitchers, got to trust. Hope that he's going to be decent, facing up against the Landers lineup that has not been too good this year. And Sungwon Moon, 1 earned run in 5 innings pitched in his last start, but it was against Hanoi. So I don't know how much we really care about that start, especially when he's going to be facing the Dinos lineup that is very lethal tonight. What are we thinking of these 2 pitchers?
I think they're both pretty interesting. They both actually made my top 3 recommendations on today's cheat sheet. Parsons is the cheapest starter on DraftKings just because he has no KBO stats, and that seems to be what they're basing their prices on. He did miss the start of the year with shoulder issues, which is definitely a worry, but it seems as though the team doesn't have him on a pitch count. So if they think he's set to throw 6 innings, 100 pitches, they know better than me, so I'm going to believe that he's ready to go. I don't think he needs to be all that good against the lineup, Landers lineup that has really struggled this year, even though it's a little bit better than it was last year. They haven't shown that yet. So for his very cheap price tag, I think he's the most obvious inclusion, even given those shoulder issues.
All right. And then for Moon, nice ERA there. Small sample size, of course. Going to be facing this lineup that is stacked. What do you think of this matchup?
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one because Moon is really quite good. He was the second best Korean starter, a qualified Korean starter in terms of ERA last year, behind Chae-Hyung Choi of the Lions. Obviously, Chang Mo-koo for the Dinos, his injuries prevented him from being a qualified starter. Didn't throw enough innings. So Moon is solid. He had a 3.65 ERA last year, struck out 19.2% of opposing batters, walked just 7.4%. So all of those solidly better than league average. He belongs near the top of any rotation. He won't come cheap, and he's facing a very tough lineup here. There's no tougher task in the KBO. So you're taking on a lot of risk by selecting him, but I think he's an interesting option in larger tournaments where, if he just has a mediocre game, you weren't going to win anyway. So the fact that the downside here is pretty terrible, given that it's the Dinos, is something I'd be willing to live with, given that there's actually a pretty decent amount of upside, and a lot of people might be scared of him given the matchup.
Mm-hmm. I definitely would be a little scared of him, knowing that this Dinos offense can score and this Landers team can't when you look at the scoring numbers. In terms of the pick here, set at 9.5, which seems kind of low considering that Dinos offense, if they can explode. But hey, if Parsons shuts down the Landers and Moon, does what he did last year, maybe 9.5 over or under.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. I mean, there's cases for either way. You don't fully know what you're getting in Parsons' first start of the year, and the Dinos can score on anybody. But I think there's reasons to trust both pitchers, so I'm actually going to go under here despite that firepower on the Dinos side. And I'm going to pick the Dinos as well, but I think this is one where if you want to pick an upset, I think there's, having faith in Moon, having faith in that revamped Landers lineup, even though they haven't justified that faith yet, and, doubting Wes Parsons in his first start of the year. I think you could certainly make a case for it, but I think I'm going to stick with Dinos just given the firepower they have on offense. I think it's more likely, but closer than you might think.
And the Dinos always a pretty good selection there. Technically tied for top of the standings, even though small sample size again. Last game here on the slate, we got the LG Twins against the Kiwoom Heroes. The matchup, I would say, in terms of the two teams facing off. The Heroes won yesterday 8-7. Both pitchers went 5 strong innings in their last start, but Jeong only had 1 strikeout, 1 walk. So not sure if you're going to get a ton of value from him. Where are we going to go?
Yeah, Jung's an interesting guy. He was a reliever for basically all of his career, but the Twins moved him back to the rotation last season for the first time since his rookie year back in 2008. They managed him very closely. They were often giving him nearly 2 weeks between starts. So I think it's pretty notable that he's starting just 1 week after his season debut this year. Seems like they're going to use him much more normally. And he was really quite good last season. ERA of 3.51. Strikeout rate right about league average, 7.5%, only walked 6.4% of opposing batters. So that's a very solid mid-rotation starter. And he's not facing a particularly scary lineup in the Heroes. I think they're still a pretty good unit, even without Ha-Seong Kim. But that certainly is a blow to lose a guy of that caliber. So I think he's somebody who could certainly have a pretty good night here, though I think he comes pretty expensive on DraftKings, and it's not the easiest matchup. So I don't think he's one of my top picks, but he's somebody you could certainly use.
Yeah, no Ha-Seong Kim in this Heroes lineup that he's facing off against tonight. But Jung-Ho Lee is pretty much doing it all, stepping up in that lineup. 3 for 4, 3 runs, 2 RBIs, and a walk last night. Saw on Twitter someone calling him Junior, and he could be an excellent MLB player in the coming seasons. We thinking that maybe Jung-Ho Lee himself could put up the over just with his power and his RBI potential in this matchup?
Yeah, we'll see how much power he ends up with this season. Only hit 15 homers last year, although that was more than his first 3 years combined. He's certainly very capable of leading a lineup, and he's got enough guys around him. But not the easiest matchup. I wouldn't be particularly excited to select any heroes, but I don't think Jung is so scary that you have to avoid him completely. Also notable with Lee that he's moved to center field mostly this year and had a really nice catch at the wall last night. I think that if he proves he can play a passable center field in addition to hitting for excellent contact, he barely strikes out ever, like 7% or something last year. So if he makes that kind of contact while playing a pretty decent center field, that's only going to raise his MLB stock.
All right. 2 interesting teams here, both with 5 wins. Pick-wise, total is set at 9.5. Which team would you give the edge to?
I'm going to go Twins because of Jung-In Kim, the Heroes pitcher who we didn't talk about yet. He's been in the league for parts of 6 years, and he's only thrown 30 total innings. 5 of those innings came last week, and he only allowed 1 run on 1 hit, but he also walked 6 guys, so it's not as if that 1 start tells me that he's suddenly an elite arm. I think there's a reason why he barely ever gets called up at the highest level in Korea. Hasn't shown anything. Career 6.90 ERA and a WHIP over 2, even after that good start last time. The Twins have gotten off to a really slow start offensively. Roberto Ramos has done next to nothing, and Hyun-Soo Kim hasn't been hot either. Their leadoff guy, Chang Ki-hong, is actually off to a great start, but those guys just aren't knocking him in, so they aren't scoring runs. But this seems like a great time for their bats to wake up. A bunch of lefties at the top of the order against a righty who, again, 30 career innings over parts of 6 seasons. No reason to be intimidated by Jung-In Kim at all. And I think this is a good time for the Twins' big bats to wake up.
And with that, you're going to go over 9.5.
Yeah, I think they're going to wake up enough to do most of the work on that over themselves. And I think the Heroes, even though Chen Hyun-jung is a pretty good pitcher, I think the Heroes have enough firepower to contribute enough to that one.
All right, that is all 5 games on the KBO slate tonight. Moving now to the top 3 picks, wrapping up the show. Got a couple minutes left. Erik, what are your top 3 going for totals or teams?
Yeah, I think the top one, when you got Aaron Brooks against a guy with something like 10 career KBO starts, I think you got to pick that one as the top one, even with the Giants offense being hot to start the year. I think I got to go. I got to have faith in Aaron Brooks here. Again, one of the very best pitchers in the entire league last year. 1 bad start out of his first 2 this year is not enough to change my opinion of him. So they are going to be number 1. I think number 2, I think I'm going to say we're going to see some runs in that Wiz Bears game. 2 pitchers who are kind of shaky at best. It is a pitcher-friendly park there, which could go against that, but it's 2 pretty strong lineups against 2 middle-of-the-road pitchers, we'll say. And there's been a lot of close ones here. So I'm not sure which I'll go with as number 3. I might go with the under in that first game. Again, I think that's mostly a bet on Aaron Brooks and a nod to the fact that Seung-Hoon Lee has got something there, and the Tigers' offense hasn't really gotten going too much. So I think they're going to have to lean on Brooks to win this one. I think they'll be able to do that, but I don't think it'll be a particularly high-scoring game.
Going against the Lotte Giants, the highest-scoring team through these 9 games, yes, but they are the highest-scoring team. I do have to acknowledge that. I might say maybe that Dinos matchup could be interesting if you trust Wes Parsons and you trust that offense. Maybe you go Dinos, but again, you don't really know what you're going to get in that first start from a pitcher that has no KBO starts. So we got one comment here. Doosan, over 4.5. I would think that'd have to be an easy one, especially against Jasong Bay.
Yeah, I don't trust Bay despite that pretty good ERA last year. I just don't think his underlying numbers are close to good enough to back up an ERA under 4. I think that Bears have enough bats, even after losing a couple guys in free agency, that I'd be pretty comfortable going over there.
All right, and that's what we're looking at. Top 3 picks: the Kia Tigers, the over in KT Doosan matchup, and the under in the Lotte Kia Tigers matchup. That is all we have for you tonight on KBO Chats Live. Be sure to check out RotoWire at rotowire.com/freekbo and follow us on Twitter at RotoWireKBO. Thanks, guys, for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody.